Transport and politics are completely interlinked. But do tomorrow's elections really make a difference to roads and railways? Now, surely these elections are about, bins, potholes and parking. Well, this is exactly the point. Not only are potholes and parking kind of key to people's experience of moving around their local environment, but councils are the ones in charge of writing local and regional plans covering things like transport and housing. And these local elections are anything but. Both Scotland and Wales go to the polls to decide on their national governments. In Wales and England, at least, the electoral map is expected to change radically. Those changes will make a massive difference to local stories across the country, but they'll also make a massive difference to the national story as well. In tonight's episode, we will ask, what is the relationship between these elections and transport at large? As ever, if you want to arm yourself with the tools to make transport better, then joining the Patreon for £5 a month is a great place to start, giving you the free audiobook of How the Rails Will Fix the Future, as well as access to the weekly bonus episode with the full back catalogue, adding a big chunk to the Rail Natter canon. Go to patreon.com/Gareth Dennis. Tomorrow, millions of people will decide who runs the national governments in both Scotland and Wales. By speaking to two Green Party candidates for the Senedd in Wales, we will explore the relationship between politics, both local and devolved, and the scale of change they can make to transport across the country. Welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Incident 225 fades away, rather abrupt ending to the intro music there. Thank you, technology. Anyway, whether it's bus, tram, or train, whether rural, historic, urban or futuristic, the most rapid changes we see to our urban fabric are not ones that come via decree from the UK Parliament. They are decisions made by overstretched city and local authorities. For England, there is an anarchic mess of varying layers of local and regional government that horribly and wastefully overlap in a way that is nebulous and undemocratically opaque. Meanwhile, in Scotland and Wales, there is at least a clearer picture of what local and national government looks like, even if the devolved governments then have a complex and somewhat subservient relationship with London. Tomorrow, elections are happening across the UK that touch almost all layers of government in England, Wales, and Scotland. Yet in the UK, the Westminster establishment has always infantilised local elections. They've done this by dragging power away from local authorities when they got too effective, framing any discussions over their results through an exclusively Westminster lens, pretending they are just some unimportant protest vote that doesn't relate to national delivery in any way, or dismissively calling them local elections in the first bloody place. Like, they're just elections, they should be called that. All of these are insulting because politics outside of Westminster is important. Councils are the most persistent interface between our lives and the functioning state, and this is absolutely true when it comes to transport. There's a particular thing I want to remind people that this election involves a series of involvements of us with democracy that the current government, the current UK parliamentary Labour Party specifically, have actively delayed to the point where the Electoral Commission forced them to not delay them. So there's a lot of elections that have already been delayed by a year. The Labour Party, the current government, were trying to delay them another year because they know they're going to go very badly, to the point where, the Electoral Commission put out this statement. Commenting on the potential postponement of local elections in May 2026, Vijay Rangarajan, Chief Executive of the Electoral Commission, said, "We note the government's statement in Parliament on 18th December inviting councils to raise capacity concerns and seek to postpone elections in May 2026. We are disappointed by both the timing and substance of the statement. Scheduled elections should, as a rule, go ahead as planned and only be postponed in exceptional circumstances. We are concerned by the possibility of some council elections in May being postponed, and even more by any further postponement to those which have already been deferred from 2025. As a matter of principle, we do not think that capacity constraints are a legitimate reason for delaying long-planned elections. Extending existing mandates risks affecting the legitimacy of local decision-making and damaging public confidence. There is a clear conflict of interest in asking existing councils to decide how long it will be before they are answerable to voters." So yeah, I think that's a pretty clear-cut statement of grim undermining of democracy that we see there. That's the level of contempt with which Westminster holds, any level of any level of sort of election below parliamentary general elections. So tomorrow's local elections cover urban boroughs, unitary authorities, county councils and district councils across England. Well, specifically, as well as 6 London local authority mayors. No, I don't know what those are for either. There will be 32 London boroughs covering 1,817 councillors. There will be 32 metropolitan boroughs around England covering 1,419 councillors. There'll be 18 unitary authority council votes covering 568 councillors. 6 county councils with 430 councillors up for election, and 48 district councils with 780 councillors at play. What a confusing mess. It's very confusing, folks. Crucially, though, they also, of course, cover what are absolutely not local elections. They are national government elections in Scotland and in Wales. The 73 Scottish parliamentary constituencies covering 129 members, so that's 73 seats plus that are done kind of hybrid, and then the top up to 129 is done with a kind of a form of PR. And then Senedd Cymru, 16 constituencies, each of which have 6 seats, returning a total of 96 members. We'll get into the details of what that format is now, actually, because in Wales, the Senedd elections are particularly significant as they're the first following major pro-democratic reforms to the voting system, moving from kind of a hybrid first-past-the-post with additional member system to what is known as a closed party list proportional representation system. It's perhaps not as I'm already seeing in the chat people are moaning about the system. It's perhaps not as democratic as the single transferable vote system. See, I can't even say it. The single transferable vote system, but it's certainly a step forward. So yeah, 16 constituencies, which are each a pair of combined Westminster constituencies, which is a good thing. Let's not create new boundaries, of which there are 32 in Wales, by the way. So each of those 32 has a partner. Each of those then has 6 seats, giving a total of 96 Senedd members. Just as is the case across the elections, the Green Party are standing a raft of candidates in the Senedd election, and I had the delight of speaking to 2 of them. Charlotte Husnjak, who's the second candidate in Caerdydd Ffynnon Taf, and Nathan Goldup-John, first candidate in Brycheiniog, Tawe, Nedd. And I asked them about the new voting system, whether it was well understood, and where the Greens fitted between kind of centre-right Welsh nationalist Plaid and far-right English nationalist Reform. I should say Plaid versus Reform. So where did the Green Party sit there?
I've been a local councillor now for 4 years in Neath Talbot, and I know that there are some progressive people in Plaid Cymru, but my experience is exactly how you've articulated, and I would say they are similar to the SNP in that sense of they kind of are that centre-right-ish with some good social progressive policies, and I think you have to just look back to kind of judge what they are. So I brought a motion to council to have a completely proportional voting system, a fair proportional voting system, STV, implemented in Neath Talbot, as was gifted to us from the Senedd in this recent round of changes to the voting system and in improving democracy. And every single Plaid Cymru member voted against it. Now, that's not a progressive party, in my view, keeping first past the post versus STV, and they do stuff like that. They when you look right and left, you're never going to move forward, and I think that's sometimes the undoing of them, because I know I'm the leadless candidate in Brycheiniog, Tawe, Nedd, and I know Nedd Williams on a personal level, and she's quite progressive, but I know some of the other people on the list, I wouldn't necessarily categorize them the same.
People who are listening might not understand the real difference that having a national party can play into an election. I was door knocking in Manchester during the recent elections up there for Westminster, and you see such a split between one party and another party, and I think having a party that stands for a country as opposed to a political ideology, some might say, really I really want the listeners in England to understand that it completely changes the political landscape of a place, because nationalist policies can look like fighting for a country whose language and culture has been downbeaten for generations upon generations upon generations. But it can also look very traditional, a big C nationalist conservation, in that my country looks like one colour. And I'm not saying that any of the parties are fighting for that in particular, but I think it is something worth considering, that people who vote don't necessarily look at policies, but they vote based on vibes or a theme. Even on doorsteps, we also talk to people who have the first past the post system in their mind, which I don't think is really being helped by certain parties at the moment, across the board, really. But what we're using this time around is a DeHont proportional representation system, which is where nobody votes for one person. You have a single vote that will go to a party, and it's like many political systems, it's really complicated and therefore is really inaccessible to a lot of people, including myself. Like, it took me a really long time to learn how it goes, which, I think says something about political education in this country and what really needs to change. But in essence, about 12% of the vote is needed to get a seat in a constituency, and there are 6 seats available. So it's a system that, in theory, is not as proportional as some other proportional representation systems, but exists so that a multitude of voices can exist to represent one constituency, as it should, really, because lots of different people live in all of our constituencies, and so this system of first past the post really doesn't benefit communities in the same way as perhaps this system might.
In quite a few seats throughout Wales, Brycheiniog, Tawe, Nedd being one, Swansea and Gower, Pontypridd, Merthyr, Cynon, I think is the name of the constituency.
Pontypridd, Cynon, Merthyr,
Yeah. Flint, Wrexham, Torfaen and Monmouthshire. Those 6 seats are really, really competitive between the Green Party and Reform. It's almost impossible for Plaid to win a 3rd seat in those areas, or a 2nd seat for some of them. And it's any additional vote that goes that way, because the narrative is it's us or Reform. Well, actually, it's just letting Reform in. It's not actually keeping Plaid bold. And, maybe if a cynical politician would say they don't want to be kept accountable by Green Party politicians, because then they know they don't have to be looking to the progressive side of politics to keep their feet, who would keep their feet to the fire and ensure that we deliver on bold progressive policies.
Whether we're talking about wards, boroughs, or the new Senedd constituencies, there is an enormous diversity in the demographics, the geography, and therefore the challenges facing the people kind of in these regions. There's a lovely shot. Actually, it's a shot of Merthyr, I think, there. But you get a feel for the diversity of some of those sort of southern Welsh constituencies, and they are hugely diverse. Back to Charlotte and Nathan.
It's a really lovely constituency, and also a very diverse constituency. Overall, made up of the northern and eastern parts of the city of Cardiff, and some commuter towns on the outside, some commuter areas which have been more connected through the recent Cardiff Metro. And then also we've got some more kind of like leafy village areas like Tafswell and things. And within that, there's a lot of economic disparity. There's a huge population difference between people from different class backgrounds, people from different cultural backgrounds. So it's a real melting pot of a constituency, which will be very interestingly reflected, I think, in the seats that get chosen.
In my capacity as a councillor, of course, we have a big role to play with the transition to the electric arc furnace in Talbot itself. But in my role as obviously the lead list candidate in Brycheiniog, Tawe, Nedd, that constituency stretches 91 miles from SA1 in Swansea all the way through to the north, well, just south of Newtown, I've been miles and the transport is terrible, right? Mm-hmm. And, I think just going around that new constituency, it's a genuine cross-section of Wales. We've got Wales' second city, Swansea, and the urban areas in just adjacent to the city centre. We've got towns like Neath and where I represent Skewin, relatively dense population centres. But then you have places like Billthwells, Nedd, and all of those little, and Brecon, of course. Hay on Wye, Gwaun we have rural settlements, we have farms. It's a genuine cross section, and I think I'd mirror what Charlotte said. In, if we do well here, which hopefully we will, that will kind of show through the rest of Wales, because we will be kind of that sense check. I think.
Yeah. There's some interesting chat going on. Firstly, Plaid Cymru are a bit like the SNP. The reason I call them centre-right is because their economic policies are centre-right, but they're a bit like the SNP in that particularly with younger members. But Gareth, I'm looking at you in the chat. You are one of their younger members for Plaid, of course. There's a huge diversity within those nationalist parties of like in the rural areas, much more classic conservatives, and actually in those urban areas, there is a much more progressive bent to a sizable chunk of the party. So this is kind of why we talked about it at the start. I think it's worth exploring the diversity. There is a big difference between English nationalism and provincial country national, Scottish, Welsh, Irish nationalism. That is different. So. The other thing that's popping up is the boundaries are completely bonkers. Yeah, those boundaries are wild. Talking of which, let's kind of go into some little specifics. It's a transport podcast after all. What are the transport challenges facing these two constituencies? First, let's talk about Caerdydd Ffynnon Taf. Caerdydd, that's just Cardiff and Gymraeg. Let's have a proper look, shall we? So here's a nice full picture from the official map of the constituency, and you've got. It's kind of got the whole like St Mellons and Llanrhymni and this whole area here, which is just like one giant sort of 80s suburb. I mean, not quite, but it's kind of got that vibe to it. It's basically everything bad about last week's episode. You've got Eastern Ave, so the kind of the A48. The number of times I've driven that road. The kind of the route into Cardiff. It doesn't have the centre. Llandaff Fields is here, so it doesn't have the main centre. It's not got that big urban lump of very dense sort of studenty and sort of mixed. Kind of mixed demographic that you've got down in the city core, and then it doesn't have some of the lesser well-off places down this side as well. It doesn't have Canton in it with its very kind of broad mixture. It's got everything kind of north of that, though. It's quite sort of light industrial, retail, and suburban, actually, in the area that it has. It's this whole section bounded by the M4, with a few exceptions, Hroth perhaps one of the key exceptions. A large area of this is very, like, post-war suburban, with everything that brings and all the challenges it brings. Meanwhile, on the other side of the M4, you've got very rural all of a sudden, because the M4 provides such a boundary. You've got Castell Coch up here. You've got Taf's Well with the kind of the railway works up. It's quite a range, a kind of a diversity up there. Very different challenges, but of course the population is much lower up there as well. So you end up with a different sort of level of necessity of delivery as well. But it's an interesting, I would say, primarily suburban constituency, with what that brings with it. Secondly, Brycheiniog, Tawe, Nedd. So this is huge. It's absolutely massive. I mean, you've got down here, you've got Abertawe, you've got Swansea, a bit of it, like little slices of it down here. You've got Neath, mostly. And then you've got the huge kind of gaps, these massive gaps that are lovely for cycling. When I did my North-South Welsh cycle a very long time ago, I was coming down through, so it's Elan Valley, Rhyder, then down, and then I went out here, and then down into Bilth, and then I did this road down into Brecon, and then over here, and anyway, it's fab. I've sliced through this, and it's glorious. I camped kind of here, and just got woken up by the army proceeding to shoot itself out here, where they have their little camp. Anyway, huge, diverse, and complex sort of constituency with a lot going on. Mostly rural in terms of landmass, but yeah, crikey, it's a fascinating, and you're right. The English border is up here. It's just a huge constituency, massive. I talked earlier about the infantilization of local politics by the London establishment. By the way, much the same applies to local politics in London itself here. I'm not being anti-London. Like internal London politics gets wrapped up into this infantilization. The classic example is like the whittling down of local transport issues into potholes. Obviously, there is much more of a link between, for example, councillors and their officers and the ability to direct and improve how people move around. But to what extent is that relationship understood by voters? To what extent does voter interest in transport map on to actual outcomes?
I've done a lot of door knocking. The amount that transport has been mentioned when it's not to do with potholes is very low. But I think that potholes are one of the, like, the ease of transport, the ease of getting around, the ease of driving. It's
also just gives a feeling of like decay. If like the potholes have a particular feeling of like, can you not, like the roads are the thing that is literally out my front door. I was hoping that being in a country where I pay tax might manifest in that as the thing that people often feel. And
obviously that's devolved to the council a lot of the time, which isn't really related to the Senedd election. But the consistent issues that are always coming up are cost of living and healthcare, and also education. There's all of these issues which I think skirt around the edge of transport in answer to your question, because I think when we talk about the cost of living, people are paying a lot of money relying on public transport systems that are unpredictable, possibly very badly logistically organised. And then there's also a lack of active travel options. I've lived in some cities before where it's really easy to cycle, but in Cardiff, my constituent, there are lots of people who cycle, but I would say that it is not a safe potentially way to get around, and the city has not been built for that. And when cycle lanes have been put in areas like Roath in my area, in my constituency, there's been a lot of public pushback because it does things like crowd bus lanes and makes traffic a lot more slow moving, which for me seems to be an issue more with the planning and not getting individual constituents involved, rather than a push for active transport. Because I think as your podcast, shows, people having trust in transport systems to get them to the places that they need to be in order to survive, such as hospitals, civic centres, cultural landmarks. It's absolutely critical. And
it's completely fundamental for the health of communities.
100%. And health as well, full stop, because in around a lot of the schools in my constituency, the air is polluted. And we know that does things like exacerbate health problems such as asthma, and it's obviously it's an urban issue in a lot of places, but the fact that the city is not designed around active transport is something that we as Greens really want to push.
Cardiff have seen a really great transformation of the heavy rail network into the Cardiff Metro, and they have relatively good bus system now. I mean, compared to where I represent, right? So when I'm knocking doors, you can't get a bus early enough to get into town for 9 o'clock, and neither if you go into town, you can't come home later than about 7 o'clock. So then just on the bus network itself, fundamentally different place. And I'm still an urban area. And then when we look at trains, for instance, on the Swan Line, there's no trains on a Sunday, arguably when most people want to go out. So what we have currently is a reliance on the car, artificially so, because I think a lot of people in my area have this cost, and let's not forget that the cost of a car isn't just the purchase of the car or the rent of the car. It's the petrol, it's the tax, it's the insurance. It's something that when the car goes wrong or breaks down, you have that cost. There's the parking, there's all of these costs associated with cars. And what I try to say is I'm not taking no one's car away. I just want to give them the opportunity to travel around more freely at a fraction of the cost, and that's what we're trying to push down our way. So when I've been door knocking, people do say, the cost of living, it's getting really unbearable. And the Wales Green Party want to try and push for a £1 bus fare, but not just the £1 bus fare in isolation. It needs to expand the network, right? Because this goes back to, I think, what the start of this conversation was when you asked me, Gareth. It's, well, if I can't get into Neath for 9 o'clock, what's the point of having a £1 bus fare? So they go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
It's reliability, affordability, and being efficient, so to speak. So, you get there, if it's 20 minutes, you're going to get there in 20 minutes. You can factor in your time. Where we haven't got that parity of public transport access around Wales. And then when we look to mid Wales, it's a public service at the end of the day, public transport. And far too often people politicise it in a negative way, or there's only 3 people on that bus. What's the point of having it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, no, the point is that it, well, Nathan, you're about to say it. It's the fact that it's got to be, they've got to see it. Visibility is critical. It doesn't matter there's 3 people on it. It's like, if they see that bus is moving regularly, then there'll be more than 3 people on it next time, Yeah,
it's what you covered in your podcast last time. That's what I listened to about streamlining bus timetables. If people trust the system, then they're more likely to use it. I think from a Wales-wide perspective, I saw earlier on the BBC today that we are at real threat of having, I think it's a quarter of our population being classified as an aging population very soon, much higher than in England, for whom they're going to obviously be needing to get to hospital more, to get to GPs, to get to supermarkets even more, and they're going to need a community. And as we have in certain areas of Wales, issues around empty houses and communities dying out, and also in big cities regarding areas of high pollution, us as a government, us as local councils, us as any local authority, being there to help people's lives be easier is just crucial, and the biggest way we can do that is through infrastructure. Also, when we're looking at under like 22s as well, so like our young populations as well, we've got a real big problem with young people leaving Wales in order to get a job or to go to university. And part of that, I think, is because there's seemingly no opportunity, and one of the best ways to create opportunity is to make it easier for people to get together and for businesses to happen, and for your commute not to take up a huge chunk of your salary. So that's why the Greens are proposing that we make all bus fares under 22s free, which will stimulate local economies as well, and therefore provide more opportunities for people. It's going out with your mates to go to like the pub so that you can go and stimulate the economy if you want to do that. Or it's even just like making friends, making connections. I think when we talk about the idea of poverty, like geographical poverty is something that is not often talked about, in how difficult it is to get from point A to point B is a drain on time, and it makes you not want to do that. And it is making it so that communities aren't connecting and people aren't able to use all the beautiful surroundings that we have. And especially if you're from a lower income background, right now driving lessons are so difficult to get. Driving tests are so difficult to get. They're so expensive. So many young people just cannot afford. I couldn't afford driving lessons when I was growing up, despite EMA.
Interesting point being made is Adam is asking, why only under 22s? There's mixed evidence on the value of totally free public transport, buses included. A tokenistic fare, actually, a £1 fare has been shown to, or let's say the difference between zero fare and £1 fare has not been shown to make much of a difference in driving mode shift. But those studies are always a bit of a mixed bag, because there are also obviously major costs saved from not having any ticketing infrastructure at all. So there's it's an interesting conversation, and it's not it's one for another rail natter, I think. So Wales has an interesting relationship with transport as a partially devolved, partially kind of undevolved matter. Rail, for example, is bizarrely spread between Cardiff and London. But what links the Senedd vote with transport, well, in Wales's case, it is some pretty big picture important stuff. To kind of explain what that looks like, let's dig into the Green Party's Welsh manifesto, shall we? So here it is, Senedd Manifesto 2026. Let's go. So, key priorities. This is interesting to talk about the big picture. Also, there's some interesting discussion, I should say, about nuclear going on. I share frustrations with opposition to nuclear because we're going to need essentially limitless free amounts of energy, and nuclear is the way to deliver that. But I have to share some of the skepticism of the current Green Party at large, given the fact that it's the way that we are building it in the UK right now, it is so slow that it is not going to solve the problems that we need it to solve. And I don't see any pathway to addressing that. Currently, it's seen as an enormous way to shift money out of the public sector and into the private sector, and it extremely slowly. If Nick Clegg hadn't opposed the sort of suite of, well, indeed, if New Labour hadn't wound down the nuclear, the kind of the rolling programme of building nuclear power plants after Sizewell B, then we might be in a different situation right now. But given that Nick Clegg's, well, if we start building them now, it'll be until 2021 when they start coming online. Well, that was 4-5 years ago now, Nick. Great work. Anyway, so that's the conversation. Let's talk about the manifesto, shall we? So the first on the list is scrap council tax. Fully agree with that. Council tax is an absolutely hopeless and regressive tax. Useless way to bring in value. It's just bad. It's very bad. Housing. Absolutely love this one. It's absolutely key. Freezing rents and building a large number of social homes is absolutely the right thing to do, because building big expensive homes isn't the problem. Most, the average home is being extended, or it's already, it's the fact that we don't have these starter homes, we don't have these accessible homes for people. Doing things like ending no fault evictions, these are all really good. Housing is super important, and health. Absolutely key, particularly in Wales. Health is something that's felt particularly keenly in Wales, partly because of the geography. And then talking of geography, of course, is transport. Transport is up there. It's a key priority. The £1 bus fare and free for under 22s is key. More routes, better links, real reliability. So that's really good. Buses, so important and easily deliverable, relatively speaking. And then childcare, water, nature and climate. These are all really core policies, and all of them interrelate, particularly housing, health and transport. They really, really closely relate to each other. But let's dig into the detail, shall we? Let's dig into the detail of the transport section here. So what is being said? So, there's lots of bumf about, suffering decades of underinvestment, many communities without reliable alternatives to the car. Absolutely. There was someone in the chat earlier saying, God forbid you let me just drive my car. Actually, what's fun is the person misspelled car and said cat. So the specific comment was, God forbid having a cat and being able to use it and having the right to do it. Whatever you do in your own home, mate. So, the Green Party will implement a long-term plan to transform how people move around Wales over the next 30 years. Public transport, walking, wheeling and cycling will become affordable, reliable and convenient choices. We'll improve coverage in both urban and rural areas, keep fares affordable and integrate transport with housing, health, environmental and land use planning to create a joined-up national system. Absolutely. So buses, key thing. We know about the key headline schemes, which is great. But the services, absolutely, this is what Nathan was saying. The services need to follow. The services absolutely need to follow. A single timetable and simple ticketing system, absolutely critical. There needs to be no multiple company bus tickets. It needs to be a single integrated system. We'll get to the fact that some of this is already happening momentarily, by the way. Supporting services that run early in the morning, later at night. Yep. So just ensuring that there is funding for this stuff. Contactless payment rolled out nationwide. Absolutely, that is very, very helpful. So the final last mile bus journey from railway station could be included in the cost of a rail ticket. So that's integrated transport, absolutely. New express bus routes, which have already proven pretty successful in Wales so far. The Traws Cymru stuff is really working pretty well, to my knowledge. And then better integration between buses and trains through coordinated timetables, so on and so on. Good stuff. Stronger collaboration between operators. And developing a national strategy for long-distance coach services as well, which is interesting. It's an interesting thing to consider and address, particularly if you start integrating that with the kind of if you like, the regional intercity or the inter-regional services within kind of, or at least mostly within the Welsh borders. So railways. This is Rail Natter. We're going to talk about trains. A modern rail network is essential for connected Wales. Absolutely. We'll establish a long-term programme of rail investment focused on resilience, accessibility and expanded services. Yeah. Familiar trio of statements there. This includes a rolling programme of electrification. Crucial, necessary and sensible financial approach. Absolutely. Increasing service frequencies in the Welsh network, including the introduction of Sunday services where they aren't in place. Absolutely key. Delivering a package of new stations throughout Wales. Good. Accessibility will be a core principle. All stations will move towards step-free access, and trains will provide level boarding. I mean, in my level boarding horn to honk loudly away, which is nice. Gethos 2021 saying being stuck in some random village in Powys with an hourly bus service sucks. So try 2 hourly. Or like 1 every 2 hours, yeah. We will support and fund tram train systems for construction in cities. Cardiff Crossrail and develop. Progress with Cardiff Crossrail. This was compressed from a longer document, is what I've been led to believe. So there are a few little squishy bits in it. For Swansea, Newport, Wrexham for construction. Okay, fine. South Wales Metro will be further enhanced. Great. The Wales Green Government will also continue to challenge the UK government over refusal to grant Wales fair consequential funding from large rail projects such as HS2, Northern Paris Rail, East West Rail, Transpennine Route Upgrade. There's little consequential being awarded. It's a mixed picture. I mean, I fully agree with this. There's a semantic conversation about the fact that because rail isn't devolved, the government doesn't have to do that. But I'm sorry, William Barter, but that is not the point here. It's a semantic conversation. It is quite clear that the political tool of the Barnett consequences have been misused in this case to ensure that funding, it was still being classified as an England and Wales project deliberately for this purpose. This is where things get particularly fun, though, because we'll continue to lobby for investment in major infrastructure to deliver a long-term vision for Welsh Rail. Going beyond a Senedd term, we will work towards inter-regional connectivity, which could include the phased development of a major new railway line linking North, Mid and South Wales. Ooh, that looks familiar. It looks suspiciously like Llanelli, the Dragon Line, which we developed here on RailNatter. You lovely lot did. Look, here it is. Here is the Dragon Line. If you want to know about what that is and how it works and how it looks and how it stitches bits of railway together and why it's much more sensible than faffing around with trains between Caerdydd and Aberystwyth, at least as the north-south route, then go to episode 116, where you can look at a very young me from not that many years ago and learn all about what that railway should look like and why it's a brilliant idea. So I'm very pleased they've included that. That's great. Excellent work. Also discussions about, coastal connections as well, which I think are sensible but different. Aberystwyth Caerdydd I'm still not fully sold on versus an integrated bus network with a braided service, but it's good stuff. And connections between West Wales and Bristol being mentioned as well. So this kind of good stuff. And Cheltenham, Birmingham and Liverpool connections as well, because it's good to see an acknowledgement that life doesn't stop at the border. Actually, a lot of those border communities, particularly up in the northeast of Wales, very heavily integrated into the communities on the other side of the border in England as well. So, and there's a lot of stuff about active and inclusive travel as well that's really important. Doubling, a mode shift of doubling the proportion of journeys made by walking, wheeling and cycling by 2030 is really powerful. 10% of the transport budget being spent on active travel is not much, but it can be absolutely transformative. And then discussion about roads. So, tackling potholes and unsafe surfaces, because that is dangerous for drivers and for cyclists as well. Electric vehicle transition by expanding fast charging infrastructure on public estates and along key trunk roads. Okay, good. Community car sharing schemes, really important to mention car sharing. See also last week's episode. And then the last one, we'll review public investment in the aviation sector, including funding for Cardiff Airport, with the aim of ending such subsidies by the end of the Senedd term and focusing instead on sustainable transport alternatives. That's nice. Get rid of Cardiff Airport. Good work. Together, these policies will deliver a transport system that is affordable, integrated, safe, low carbon, and designed for the future of Wales. Very nice. There's lots to agree with in there. Lots of really solid stuff to agree with. Yeah, someone's saying, wait, it's all RailNatter plans, and that always was pistol emoji. Yeah, well, no, I couldn't possibly claim that. But turns out RailNatter, look, if you want to be involved, Patreon, £5 above. We're an influential podcast when it comes to transport policy. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, look, Welsh transport policy, that's a load of good stuff. But actually, Welsh transport policy, I've said repeatedly, with the 20-mile-an-hour limit rollout being kind of probably the best example, and I would say the most important transport policy intervention in a generation. We've talked on RailNatter a lot about how much Wales is beating Scotland and England when it comes to integrated transport, to good transport policy. So where do the Greens differentiate themselves, given that Plaid and Labour, Labour assisted by Plaid, should I say, have actually done a good job on lots of fronts? Well, first it comes back to what we said earlier about some of the stuff that they've not gone far enough on. But what needs improving? Is the picture really that rosy?
There definitely are gaps, and I think you're right. Where they do good things, they do good things, and we will praise them for it. But as I was just talking about the bus franchising, a landmark piece of legislation, it hasn't got the supported funding to have that aspirational bus network. So people are still going to have a bus that doesn't get them into their job on time. Now, we can't do bus franchising half-assed. We need to be able to give people confidence, because that's the thing. When we're trying to do these public transport measures, we are directly or indirectly, depending on where you are, competing against the car, either someone's private car or a lift. So if it's not easier or more reliable than walking out your front door and jumping into your car, it's not worth it, right? So we need to ensure that people can walk to their high street and they know the bus is going to be there. Now that's a flaw to me. We should be funding the aspirational bus network, because then we will encourage people on to the buses and see that modal shift. Similarly, Cardiff Metro, fantastic, but the rest of Wales has been left behind, and there's no pipeline of work right now. It's not been articulated how that's going to get across the line. Again, Wales transport hierarchy, Llwybr Nedd, fantastic piece of legislation. Really, really good piece of legislation. but then you've seen some of the previous decisions by the previous transport minister that doesn't really go in line with them. Most notably, continuing to build roads.
Yep.
Well, actually, I think there was a calculation where the Rhondda Link Road, it was announced sometime last year, and that was about £50 million of funding. But the Aberdare-Hirwaun extension, high level again, was about £50 million of funding. Now, that is, if you're making decisions in line with Llwybyr Newydd, then surely you would be investing in the extension to Hirwaun on the train, not in your car. So I think there are three key examples of actually they are doing good things, but they tend to drop the ball at the last 25%.
It is, and it's frustrating. It's such a similar story in Scotland. I mean, again, no, I would say Wales further ahead, but in Scotland, a similar story where you have like, but you need to commit. Yeah, you've said some good stuff there, but why are you spending that £1 billion on that dueling of the A9 or whatever it happens to be? Yeah, it's as I say, Wales further ahead than Scotland, but it's lots of echoes of familiar things. England, it's just everything's on fire. So at least you're not. It's not England, but yeah, it's. Yeah, sorry, go on, Nathan.
But if I could, just on the 20 mile an hour,
yes,
and back to canvassing, I'm really glad that they pushed that through. And actually, I think it had cross-party support. Obviously, the Greens aren't in the Senedd yet, but that's something that we've all campaigned on. It saved £100 million of taxpayers' money in the first year. And when I was knocking doors up in Brecon, I had 3 doors in a row. They said, "What do you think of 20 mile an hour?" And I said, "I completely support it." And they said, "We hated it when it came in, and now we completely support it." I'm the vice chair of Democratic Services Committee in Neath Talbot as well, and we do this annual member survey. And we had a meeting last week where I said, "Can we make sure we put into the survey how members got to their meetings?"
Yes,
I can guarantee that above 90% of them are getting there by driving their own car, but they are making decisions on the bus and active travel network and the rail network, and that there's no direct correlation because 1/3 of people in Wales do not have access to a car.
Yeah.
Do you get me? Like, there's a genuine disconnect when we're thinking about these things. And I think I had a hustings in Talgarth last week, and there was a lady from the Heritage Party. It was awful, but she said, "Oh, this is a game." It's not a game. It's people's lives.
It's not a game. Yeah.
It's people's lives. Do you get me?
Yeah.
And I think we have to change some political psyches as well. Like, it's not a sheet of paper that you can just go, get rid of the 197 because we don't need it anymore. It's actually impacting people's lives. And I think coming back to those doorstep conversations, that's the good thing about us Greens. We really genuinely try to be engaged and work hard in our communities and listen to people. Stand firm on our principles, of course, but we're going to be there.
Yeah, why, you might be asking, actually asking quite a lot because the lovely chat is kicking away. I think the manifesto, by the way, does mention starting work on a second rail tunnel to Bristol under the Severn. So that is a thing that's in the manifesto. It's a necessary project, frankly. You might be asking, why just look at the Greens manifesto? Why not Plaid or Labour or the Lib Dems? And, with accepting what we've said about Plaid, my view is that let's put Plaid to one side, but in terms of the other parties, particularly Labour, you shouldn't be voting for Labour. It's simple as that. It's a party that hasn't just failed on its own economic terms, but has supported an illegal war in Iran, facilitated a genocide in Palestine, and is ramping up a genocide against trans people in the UK. And that's before we talk about its attacks on disabled people, juries, its obsession with keeping water in private hands, its lacklustre interest in the cost of living crisis, the rights of renters, or its wafer-thin care about transport other than aviation. No, Labour needs a hard kicking in these elections. But what about the Greens and their attitude to infrastructure upgrades? We've already talked a little bit about nuclear. Well, okay, hello, Jenny Jones, bane of my life. Well, the manifesto states a clear commitment to a new north-south line. There are other major infrastructure statements made. Electrification is explicitly stated in terms of a rolling programme. But what about other urban projects? What about, say, the Swansea Bay Metro?
Yeah, so Swansea Bay Metro, I think that's something that we're very keen on in the Wales Green Party, because, we've got a lot of jobs here. They're all disjointed, not connected. I've touched upon how the bus system doesn't really run early enough or late enough. And we don't have that backbone of a transport system around southwest Wales. And Swansea Bay, it's got loads of opportunities, but they're not being actualised. Tidal Lagoon, for instance, not yet constructed or funding approved. We had GCRE up in the Dillais Valley. God knows if that'll ever be built now. You've got Avon, Wild Fox, kind of centre parksy, big, huge development in the Talbot side. You've got quite a substantial £1 billion development in Swansea Bay. But the big missing link, in my view, is that joined up transport system. There just isn't one. You can't get between these places and these points of opportunity. So one thing that I would, and Transport for Wales has been doing a very good job, to be fair, there's credit due there, but I think we should call out Welsh Government and UK government's non-existent £14 billion. They've said £14 billion, but it's not in the bank.
Yeah, where's that?
Yeah. Where is it?
Yeah, where's that?
I think we should, if we get into power, we should get our civil servants and Transport for Wales to write to DfT a decision to deliver paper in that RNEB process. We should, for Swansea Bay, we can get phase 1, 2 and 3 all delivered and start having that genuine joined up approach for public transport, particularly your rail and your tram trains. I'm a bit 50-50 on the tram train, I'm not going to lie. I think
Me too.
We could be...
It's the worst. You've made a tram worse and you made a train worse. I'm also a bit 50, but I accept that it's the system,
That's not fair.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah, do you get me? Like, I'm a bit like, so in Swansea Bay, at least, we've got this phase 1 out to Pembrey Bury Port from Swansea, phase 2, which is Swansea, Ammanford to Swansea via Neath, and then this phase 3 is this tram train link through the city centre on street, and then up to the valleys of Neath and Dillais, and which is where I think maybe that could just be a tram instead of a tram train, and it could be a lot cheaper. Interoperability. Anyway, don't have to go there. But I think if we focused our efforts on trying actually to release money from Westminster, UK government endorsed the document, Welsh government endorsed the document. Now it's time to actually implement what that document's trying to do. All of these other parties are saying we're owed £4 billion, but no one has actually outlined how we're going to draw down the money.
Yep.
Let's start drawing down this bloody money. Let's write as many of these papers to deliver these schemes across Wales, because as we've just mentioned, stimulating the economy, going to the pub is really, really important. Getting time back. I've done work on the train to go to work. That is an hour of work. Do you get me? Where I'm not concentrating on driving. Getting access to lovely public open space, the beach, the Brecon Beacons in the Swansea Bay area, that is something that's really important. Also, housing, that unlocks lots of density that we can build. And as a trained urban designer and planner and someone who works in transport planning now, that is one gap where Welsh Government, I just think, is dropping the ball substantially. Why are we not linking them up?
It's a UK-wide issue. Like there is a complete disconnect between housing policy and transport policy, and it's like, no, we've given housing people, they give 20 pence of Section 106 to their local railway station. That's connected up. It's like, no. We're selling off all this railway land to build houses on, and the houses will be very low density suburban style houses next to the road. No. Oh my goodness, yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, because I used to work for Transport for London a little while ago, and there was a study that came out, and maybe my figures aren't quite right now because it was about 10 years ago, but it was something like, if you stood on the tube for 20 minutes, you'd save the NHS in London £1.2 billion. Right? It was that is what they classed as active travel as well, just standing up for 20 minutes. Now apply that, and this is where I think Greens have a niche, is that we know that transport isn't just transport, it's housing, it's health, education, it's well-being, it's everything, right? There's a catalyst of things that there come after, as long as you implement it correctly. So I think to bumble on, we really do need to get on with delivery of those systems, because it unlocks a lot of other opportunities in these other sectors that we are trying to address. Not just us either, though, is it? As Greens, but us as politicians, us as the public, we want to address them, and this is something I think will address a lot of these problems.
Incidentally, the Metro plans are a bit of a mixed bag with a severe lack of commitment. But referring back to last week, this is the perfect scheme to just get an annual budget and crack on, or not last week, the week before, to get an annual budget and crack on delivering what it can over and over and over, whether it's stations or additional tracks or upgrades to signalling or trains or buses or whatever it happens to be, just to have a fixed annual budget and just to keep delivering over and over and over. By the way, if you want to watch the full unedited conversation between Charlotte, Nathan, and myself, you can watch that on tonight's bonus episode, going out at 20. Actually, it'll be going out just after this episode does, for all you lovely £5 and above Patreon subscribers. And pertinent to Rail Matters, I was just today, this morning, I think, on Trash Future, this week's mainline episode. Go and listen to it, because I talk about Forest City 1 if you want to know what that is. There will be a future Rail Natter on this subject as well, where we'll dive into the detail. But this is, yeah, it's interesting. Go listen to that if you're interested. And yeah, there's a few other things we talk about as well. Reform politics and a few bits and pieces. So Keir welcomes the results of this election and encourages them to go further by probably not being in a job by the end of the week. Farewell to Keir Starmer. Perhaps the most critical thing is less how much of a drubbing Labour get, right? But how much of a disappointment either Reform or the Greens get. That's going to be the thing we're paying attention to. Who is going to be disappointed by these results? Like, the Greens are going to, I hope, do very well. Reform, I'm afraid, are also going to do very well. But are Reform going to be disappointed, or are the Greens going to be disappointed? That's the thing that I'm really worried about. I don't know why I'm doing the David Cameron pointy thing with my thumb. I am worried about that. Only one of these parties is actually ascendant in national polling right now, but the Greens are clearly still behind at this point. Let's see what happens. For example, what will Starmer's very likely departure and subsequent reshuffle mean for the ongoing trundle of rail reform? It got worse after Louise Haigh got the boot. I suspect it won't get better now. In Wales, the Greens are not expected to sweep up in the way that they will in England, but pushing Plaid leftwards is extremely important. But what actually is at stake here?
Things are going to change in what I think for any viewer or listener who hasn't been involved in Welsh politics, Labour for the first time will not be in charge. We know this. They will not be in charge. So that is a huge shift, both politically, but also ideologically. Transport conversations and everything has taken up a huge amount of space in the Welsh elections, and in political conversation going back, the idea that in order to go from one end of the south of Wales to the north of Wales, you have to go into England and then get back out. There's this consistent feeling that a country as a whole has been done down by the current formula that we use to calculate how much money we have, but I think also by a government down in Cardiff that isn't really reflecting the people. So we're going to have change. And we've also got a new system, which means we're going to have a huge amount of different voices, some of which have never been in the Senedd before. But you can spin that in a very positive manner, in that it's going to be people coming from real backgrounds who are actually going to fight for change for the people of Wales. And the Greens are going to be a huge factor in terms of swinging votes and making sure that the policies that we think will make people's lives better are actually inputted within the next 4 years. Please read our manifesto.
Yes, absolutely. Do read that manifesto.
It's about a bolder politics. It's about a politics of difference. We do things differently. We talk to people, and as long as at the end of the day we're cutting bills, getting a more greener, fairer society, we'll work with anyone. Now, look, don't get us wrong. There's parties that don't want that. And that's not what we're not going to capitulate on our values, but we're going to continue to deliver for the Welsh people. We're going to continue to hold Plaid accountable and hold them to be bold, because that's really important, because it could be easy. And they've been supporting Labour for the last 27 years. Their budgets have been pretty much being passed in the Senedd for the last 27 years, and people aren't feeling that change on the ground. Yeah. So if you want a party to hold the new Plaid Cymru government to account, that's the Greens. Do you get And if you want to call out racism, homophobia, misogynistic tendencies from some of the right-leaning parties, then you want the Greens, because that can't be the norm in Welsh politics. We're a country that gives a cwtch, not closes the doors, and we need to actively show that.
Tomorrow is the biggest chance we all have to show Labour that it has utterly failed, and that it isn't just going to get a bloody nose from the left, it's going to be defeated by the left. What happens afterwards is going to be very interesting and very unpleasant in equal measure. But if there is one call to action that I have, that I can give, it is this. go and vote. You know, I cannot say this more loudly. It is get out there and vote. That is absolutely what it is all about. There are a few interesting points being made. Gareth has given us a delightful little... Thanks, Gareth. Diolch yn fawr. Let us not forget that the first Green MP was in Wales when Cynnog Davies stood on a joint plaid green ticket in Caerdydd. That's very nice. That's a tasty little fact there. The fleas strike back. Thanks, Katie. Yeah. Thanks to all of you for joining. Please, if you don't already, smash that subscribe button because these things are important for the algorithm. And I look forward to seeing those of you for the bonus episode later, and everyone else next week. Go vote if you can. I can't. York has no local elections, sadly. But if you are somewhere that you can vote, don't just vote, but tell everyone within earshot to go vote as well. To the Greens across the country who are involved, the candidates, the campaigners, the door knockers, getting out there, very, very, very best of luck to you. Let's see what happens by the end of this week. And auf Wiedersehen to Starmer. Cheerio! Cheerio!
Land of my fathers, take one.
Of course, this wouldn't be done without talking about the British Rail Class 307. These lovely little EMUs. Well, they're not lovely. They're just horrible bloody Mark 1 based things. They're built at Eastleigh between 1954 and 1956. When they were used on Gemmell between Liverpool Street and Southend, running kind of like semi-fast services, and when they updated the electrification system from 1500 DC to 25 kV overheads, AC overheads, the whole fleet had to be rebuilt. Forward planning from Britain right there. And so they got like a heavy refurbishment in the early 80s, and that dragged them out a little bit further. Continued to run on that line, and also a few of them were painted into NSE livery, which is nice. But the class was largely kicked off that route by the Class 310s by the early 90s, and they ended up on the West Coast Main Line, and then disappeared. They kind of ended up all over the place, but basically they were all on their way out by the mid 90s. So by early 93, they were gone. They were in Donny for a bit. They were running on between Leeds and Doncaster when that had been electrified in the early 90s. They were gonna scrap them, but they didn't. And what they ended up doing is turning some of them into scrap metal at Old Dalby with a crash test, which you can watch Carol Vorderman talking about on YouTube, and testing things like anti-climb plates, and also it's very interesting testing they were doing. I think they were doing it at Whitberpool actually, and further up the line at Old Dalby as well, further down at Old Dalby. Anyway, and then they converted most of the rest of them into what they called like these propelling vehicles, like these like propelling control vehicles. Originally, they were going to build they were going to use these to build a fleet of parcel vehicles, but they realized that was a shit idea. And instead, they were going to, they built the 325s. So we got 325s as a result of these things being hopeless. But the other thing that's interesting is that they converted one of these things to test the traction motors in the Class 323. So the funny noise that those 323s make, the Husnjak Transportation System 323s make, would have been made by a Mark 1 unit for a bit, which is sort of strange. That thing got scrapped in 2006. And then the rest of them all ended up sort of surviving for a bit longer as these sort of propelling vehicles until we stopped moving parcels around at scale not long after they'd all been converted. So that was a delight. Anyway, there is your as is tradition, your little segment of here is the class of train that matches the episode. Bye lovelies, go vote.